Friends, we come together today in grief, acknowledging our human loss, yet we also gather to honor Raymond P. Shafer's long life of service. As we do, let us turn to God in prayer. Gracious and loving God, we praise you for the life of Raymond Shafer and for all those who have gone before us. Even as we shrink before the mystery of death, we acknowledge your hand in all things and the natural course of life and death that you set in motion. We ask that you be with us in this hour of grief, that we may celebrate the life of this remarkable man, even as we release him to your eternal care. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Shafer family, friends from near and far, Allegheny College alumni, faculty, staff, students, visiting dignitaries, both elected and appointed, retired and active. Glancing over this way, it's as if I'm in Harrisburg or Washington, D.C. It is terrific to have you here. What an honor and a tribute to the man we're honoring today. Honored guests. And welcome too to the simulcast viewers across campus in, yes, Shafer Auditorium, and to viewers across the Commonwealth. I'm Richard Cook, president of Allegheny College. Participating in today's service of celebration and remembrance, in addition to Chaplain the Reverend Jane Ellen Nickel, is the Honorable Hugh Flaherty, former Secretary for Legislation and Public Affairs during Governor Shafer's administration, who will deliver the eulogy. The Reverend Terry Clark of First Christian Church in Meadville will lead us through scripture and reflections. Sharing family remembrances will be nephew and close friend Paul D. Pete Shafer and son Raymond P. Shafer Jr., known to all of us as Phil. And Dr. Beth Eder is providing the beautiful music today. I also want to acknowledge the efforts of the faculty and staff in making these arrangements, and to the brothers of Phi Kappa Psi, Governor Shafer's fraternity, for their assistance in today's service. Ray Shafer was a man of extraordinary talent and achievement. Simply put, he excelled at absolutely everything he did, from his earliest years right to the end of his long and productive life of dedicated service. As Governor Rendell said earlier this week, Ray Shafer was one of the most dedicated servants in the Commonwealth's history. Pennsylvania has lost one of its finest sons. Indeed, so has Meadville, Crawford County, and so has Allegheny College. But beyond achievement, Ray Shafer was a decent, caring man, a great patriot, a loyal Allegheny College alumnus, and a loving husband and father. He loved his country and was dedicated to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to Crawford County. He spoke frequently to me of his wife of 65 years, Jane, and of his children, Diane, Phil, and the late Jane Ellen, with genuine pride and affection. That pride and affection extended to his entire family, both here and departed. And the governor often said that other than family and country, his greatest loyalty was to his alma mater, Allegheny College. Reflective of that, he specifically requested that his funeral be conducted on this campus here in Ford Memorial Chapel. I valued Ray's insights as a college trustee of over 40 years' service. We had many wide-ranging conversations, which I cherish very much and always will. He was always supportive, encouraging, and enthusiastic, and he became a mentor and dear friend. There are countless others who've had similar experiences. Governor Shafer opened doors and raised hopes and expectations of everyone he met, students, faculty, new trustees, and no doubt for many of you with us here today. Allegheny College has lost its favorite son, but we will always benefit from his loyalty and good counsel. His memory is embedded in countless aspects of our institutional and individual lives. Ray Shafer knew and had access to the rich, the powerful, the famous, but he never was boastful about that fact. He never forgot where he came from, or did he lose who he was. He valued everyone, and he treated each and every individual with respect, concern, and great affection. Godspeed, Raymond P. Shafer, Governor, Lieutenant Commander and War Hero, Phi Beta Kappa Scholar, Student Body President, All-American Athlete, Law Partner, Citizen Servant, devoted husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle, mentor, friend. And there's one other thing that I know the governor would want me to say, and you've probably heard it many times, and his classmates would want me to say this too. 38's great. Those who are able, please rise and join in singing the Allegheny College alma mater, the words of which are found in your program.
Next month is the 40th anniversary of Governor Shafer's inauguration. He was really looking forward to the party they're throwing here at Allegheny to celebrate the occasion and eagerly anticipating reminiscing with friends about his 4 years as governor. How sad he will not get that opportunity. So I'll take a few moments today to reminisce with you about the man I knew. One thing I remember well is that he was an incorrigible and incurable optimist. During the 4 years of his gubernatorial term, Governor Shafer used to open my office door and say, when things got tough, and say, "Don't worry, Hugh, everything's going to be all right." Well, I didn't think so, but he did. It wasn't until just a few years ago that he confessed to me that his optimism was always conditional. He told me that at the end of saying, "Don't worry, everything's going to be all right," he would say very silently under his breath, "If God be willing." Well, given his current predicament, I can hear his incurable optimism today telling us, "Don't worry, my friends, everything's going to be all right, if God be willing." And I ask you, why wouldn't God be willing for such a man? He was loving, decent, kind, brave, and highly intelligent. At the core of his character stood respect, integrity, fairness, honor, and courage. And he believed individual initiative, personal responsibility, and moderation were the keys to a good life. The result was a good man, husband, father, friend, war hero, and a strong, rare leader of this community, state, and nation. Our votes recognized his qualities, and so did his peers in national politics. His elected titles were many: president of his high school and college class, successful district attorney in Crawford County, state senator, lieutenant governor in the outstanding administration of Governor William Scranton. He was also elected by his peers in the National Governors Conference as their chairman, following Ronald Reagan. They also gave him bipartisan support for leadership positions in the National Governors Conference. Clearly, the governorship was the sun of his universe, and his other public and private services and contributions to society were his bright stars. Stars that included his work as chairman of the National Committee on United States-China Relations, chairman of the National Advisory Council on Public Service, chairman of the National Committee on Marijuana and Drug Abuse, senior counselor to the Vice President of the United States, and in the business world as a partner and senior counselor for Cooper's Live Brand in the nation's capital. His directorships included Atlantic Council, a national organization of disability, the USO, World Board of Governors. He was a trustee of the world-renowned Cleveland Clinic Foundation, George Mason University, and visiting professor and lifelong fellow of the University of Pennsylvania's prestigious Wharton School. He would tell you today that his brightest star, as Dr. Cook has pointed out, was his love of his home and roots in this community. His lifelong devotion and contributions to Meadville were mammoth. So was his love affair with Allegheny College as a scholar, star athlete, trustee, and interim president during a time when this institution needed him very badly. Ray Shafer's personal values and attributes made him a naturally conservative politician. He believed human beings are imperfect creatures who, although not perfectible, must constantly seek improvement through an individual and collective pursuit of excellence. He was Aristotelian in his belief that it is not enough to know excellence. We must try to use it. And that became a governing principle of his leadership. To exemplify this principle, he loved to tell the story about Michelangelo painting the eye of an angel on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The artist spent hours, he was sick doing this, spent hours trying to get the eye just the way he wanted it. A friend asked, "Why do you spend so long on that little eye? Because it's up too high for anyone to know it's imperfect." And Michelangelo replied, "I will." Ray Shafer sought to pursue excellence within a framework of conservative moderation. He believed, like the father of political conservatism, Edmund Burke, that each generation must regard itself not as owning the assets of society, but taking care of them because it inherits a treasure from the past, which is its duty to pass on to future generations. It is a conservatism that eschews zealotry and does not view change as anathema. Like Burke, the governor believed that many have been taught to think moderation is a sort of treason, but a state without a means of some change is without a means of conservation. That translated for Ray Shafer into limited government that helps individuals meet their personal responsibilities, not a government that assumes their responsibilities. He called on Pennsylvanians to help those who need it and provide opportunity for those who want it. With that philosophy, Ray Shafer governed Pennsylvania. The result was that under his leadership, there was no major area of the state government in which improvements and advancements were not made. Building on the strong foundation of the Scranton administration, the governor advocated and provided historically high support and reform for public schools, unprecedented growth in public and private higher education, aggressive improvement in environmental protection policies and programs, and a record acceleration of the interstate highway system and planning. And his renewed emphasis on economic development netted the creation of nearly 170,000 new and future jobs for Pennsylvanians. I still have in my files a list the governor created at the beginning of his administration to remind him of the 179 specific pledges he and his party made to the voters in the state's 1966 GOP platform. 99% of those pledges were fulfilled at the end of his term. The governor also kept a list of innovations. His list of firsts. He loved firsts. On the list are new departments of transportation and environmental protection, the creation of the Pennsylvania Public Television Network, the first Pennsylvania Crime Commission, and the Consumer Protection Bureau. There also are the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Authority, a youth advisory council, a science and engineering foundation, a partner city program, a 5-year programming and planning budget, and the governor's economic advisory council. Certainly, Governor Shafer left us with a broad range of significant accomplishments from which history can judge his place among Pennsylvania leaders. But in my opinion, no accomplishment places him among the great governors more surely than his leadership and fight to improve the state's constitution. That effort truly sums up who he was. Against the advice of many political leaders, constitutional revision became the first and highest priority of his incoming administration. They warned him that such a priority would sap his strength for the fight to win support from the legislature for creating a modern revenue base to meet the growing demands and needs of an old industrial state. He knew they were right, but it was long past time to remove archaic constitutional provisions that prevented modernization of the judiciary, local governments, and state finances, governance, and other serious limitations. Ray Shafer courageously put the future of his new administration on the line. He once said to us at a staff conference, "With this decision, I want you all to be prepared for an extremely bumpy ride over the next 4 years." He enlisted the support of many, including Governor Scranton and George Leader. They campaigned for the first constitutional convention in more than a century. The voters approved. The convention produced new provisions for reforming and unifying the judiciary, modernizing the state's financial and governance structure, and streamlining local governments. And because of his courage and willingness to risk the future of his administration, Pennsylvania is a better place today. That puts him in my Hall of Fame of governors. It should enshrine him for all time in Pennsylvania's historical memory. The Philadelphia Inquirer certainly enshrined him in its editorial at the end of his administration. It said the governor was a man ahead of his time who compiled a record of personal integrity, inexhaustible fortitude, and executive achievement. Now, that's not a bad epitaph when compared to the critics who claim he failed because the legislature refused to enact a revenue base needed to meet the state's then and future needs. At the same time, those legislators also refused to cut the budget to live within the state's means. Well, in my opinion, Ray Shafer won that battle in the long run, even though he was in absentia. In the very next session of the legislature, a new revenue program, much like the one he had proposed, was adopted. He knew there would be no other option. So as we gather today to say goodbye to this good and great governor, I can think of no better way to share this moment with you than to have Ray Shafer say goodbye to you in his own words. Words he used in his farewell address to the state legislature on January the 6th, 1971. My fellow Pennsylvanians, he began, today I say farewell as governor, naturally a different man than I began. Prouder of my Pennsylvania heritage, more boastful of the Commonwealth's great people and incomparable beauty, richer with the privilege of serving, warmer with the friendships made, wiser from the battles lost and won. Sadder that too often the price of progress in politics is the enemies it makes and the pettiness it engenders. Skeptical about our individual willingness to make personal sacrifices when necessary for the maintenance and improvement of our republic. More aware than ever before of the need to peacefully but aggressively change tradition-bound institutions to help people solve their individual and collective problems in a society being dehumanized by science and technology. More deeply concerned about the selfishness of divisive groups that keep the family of man separated as a state, a nation, and a world. But finally, ever more hopeful and prayerful that all our people will recognize our common cause and that their leaders, elected and appointed, will come to their senses, rise above demagogy and political aggrandizement, and understand the true meaning of wearing the mantle of leadership and begin again, as our founding fathers did in Philadelphia, to lead public opinion and not be led by it. Then Ray Shafer offered us this final prayer. I pray that you will be given the strength and the wisdom to understand this plea. It is a vision of yourselves and your individual worth that I pray each of you have or will be given. It is a vision of Pennsylvania and her future that I now carry with me into private citizenship in the Commonwealth I love so much. May God bless all of you and help you to do what is right for all of us. And now, as my final act as governor before you, I bid you a fond and affectionate farewell. Now, Governor Shafer, it's our turn to bid you a final fond and affectionate farewell. We thank you for your love, for your courage, for your integrity, for your respect, for your good citizenship, and for your exquisite and courageous leadership. We know that everything is going to be all right for you now because God must be willing after all you did for us.
On behalf of First Christian Church, I would like to express to all the members of the Shafer family our deepest sympathy and love. The Shafer family has blessed our congregation since Ray's dad became our pastor in 1933. You remain in our thoughts and prayers in your time of loss. The scripture reading that I have chosen for today comes from the New Testament book of Romans. In chapter 13 of that epistle, the Apostle Paul wrote these words: "Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good." God accomplishes the good he desires to impart to mankind in many ways and through many servants. Some of those servants are very obvious: physicians who heal, counselors who analyze and comfort, musicians and writers who inspire us, educators who enlighten our minds and broaden our horizons. But we live in a time when lawyers, law enforcers, and lawmakers are all too often viewed with cynicism. Few would think of those we call public servants as God's servants for the good of mankind. Yet the Apostle Paul said of such people, they are God's servants to do you good. Some of God's servants minister within a very small sphere of influence. It may simply be within their family, or their church congregation, or a small community. Other servants, like Raymond Shafer, minister on a larger stage. Governor Shafer, through his life of public service at the community, state, and national levels, served the people of Crawford County and Pennsylvania and the United States with great dignity and great effectiveness. And whether he realized it or not, he was also serving God's purposes. He was more than a prosecutor, a lawyer, or a politician. He moved in circles of great power, yet, as someone wrote about him in the paper, he was a gentleman and a gentle man. Even though he was a man of extraordinary accomplishment, he retained the marks of humility that often set him apart from his contemporaries. One of the principles most evident in Jesus' teaching is that we serve God by serving man. Jesus made that very clear in the passage that's recorded in Matthew chapter 25. In speaking of the downtrodden and the less fortunate, those who have nothing to eat or nothing to wear, those who are sick, those who are falsely imprisoned, Jesus said, "Whatever you did for the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." One of the articles in the newspaper in the last few days described the governor's tenure as Crawford County District Attorney and included the following. I quote, "He also worked to reconcile husbands and wives and parents and children to their disputes so that their disputes did not have to go to court." The article concluded, Shafer was active in dealing with the problems of youth. He worked directly with the juvenile court and juvenile probation office. By devoting himself to more than just prosecuting, by devoting himself to improving the lives of others, Raymond Shafer was God's servant. He was blessed to step onto the broader stage where his influence for good would extend beyond the state of Pennsylvania, and through his subsequent service in the Nixon and Ford administrations, he was God's servant to our nation. The Apostle Paul wrote that those in positions of authority are God's servants to do us good. Raymond Shafer fulfilled that calling. Some of us serve God by doing good within our families, our schools, our communities. And while Raymond Shafer accomplished many good things for his family, and within certainly many smaller circles, we are blessed that he was able to step onto that larger stage and accomplish so much good for so many people. We are indebted to him for his service to us and thus to God. I didn't know the words to that last hymn we sang. Sounded like perhaps not many of you did. But I couldn't help but think about the last verse and those words in a hymn entitled, "Now Praise We Great and Famous Men." That last verse said, "In peace their sacred ashes rest, fulfilled their day's endeavor. They bless the earth, and they are blessed of God and man forever." Let's pray. Almighty God, creator of heaven and earth, sustainer of life, we come before you to humbly seek your blessing. We thank you for the life and influence of this remarkable man. Whether saving lives in wartime or administering justice in peacetime, his influence cannot be overstated. He has in so many ways made our lives better, and in doing so, he served your purposes, and for that we are ever grateful. You granted him a long and productive life, and you have blessed untold numbers of people through him. May we be inspired to follow in his footsteps by devoting ourselves to making our world a better place. We now ask your comfort and strength for his loved ones. May they find consolation not only in the magnitude of his accomplishments, but even more in the majesty of your love. We ask this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
The first century philosopher Seneca wrote, "He who has attained wisdom has reached the most important goal. Such a one may indeed exult boldly and give thanks to the gods and count himself nature's creditor for having lived. He will indeed have the right to do so, for he has paid her back a better life than he has received." And certainly Raymond did so. In addition to his many other talents, he was always so generous and loving to his family. He loved being not only a father, but a grandfather and a great-grandfather. When he and I talked, he always expressed pride in his family. And when he did so, he graciously included my family too. He was truly proud to have and to have met great nephews and nieces. Raymond's wise guidance through the years helped shape all our lives. His example inspired all of us. As Elbert Hubbard wrote, "My heart goes out to the man who does his work when the boss is away, as well as when he is at home. Civilization is one long, anxious search for such individuals. He is wanted in every city, town, and village, in every office, shop, store, and factory. The world cries out for such. He is needed, and needed badly, the man who can carry a message to Garcia. My uncle was such a man, and we will all miss him greatly."
anyone who is loved is beautiful. The reverse is not necessarily true. It does not follow that all beauties are loved. For beauty is part of being loved. Being loved is primary. So, when love is present, beauty follows necessarily. My father was a beautiful man. There's been much discussion of his love for his family. And that's not without reason. He loved and was loved by his family. He loved his parents and his grandparents. He loved his aunts and uncles and cousins. He loved his sisters, his brothers, his nephews and nieces. He loved my mom, and he loved their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And in the last few years of his life, Dad was most grateful for an expansion of his family to include a number of most wonderful people who have given so much of their time, skill, care, and most of all their love to my mom and dad. They have made an incalculable difference. They have both made possible and brought forth joy in the face of greatest difficulty. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to speak for my dad and for all of us and say thank you from the bottom of our heart. The gauge of a good man is the size of the love bruise he leaves on your neck, or the size of the love bruise he paints on your brain, or the size of the love bruise he weaves into your soul, or indeed, it could be all of the above.
Our words of commendation are those that a pastor of my former church often used at funerals. We give Raymond back to you, O Lord, who first gave him to us. As you did not lose him in the giving, so we do not lose him in his return. For life is eternal, and love is immortal, and death is but a horizon, and the horizon nothing more but the limit of our sight. And now, friends, may God bless you and keep you. May God make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. You may be seated.
PCN brings them all together. PCN, a television network for Pennsylvanians, only on cable.
Governor George Leader, can you tell me about your relationship with Governor Shafer?
Well, I learned to know Governor Shafer when he was lieutenant governor with Governor Scranton. And he surely had a good teacher because Scranton had a good administration, and Shafer had the benefit of those 4 years of being a part of that, at least observing it, and I'm sure participating in some of the decisions. So by the time he came along and was elected into office, he was thoroughly qualified, I would say. Beyond that, in terms of his personality, Ray Shafer was a warm and friendly man. I can't ever remember meeting anybody who didn't like Ray Shafer.
And what would you say, in terms of his governorship, looking at his governorship, what would you say were his biggest accomplishments?
Ray Shafer, the monument to the memory of Ray Shafer is Pennsylvania's new Constitution. He called me up between the time he was elected and the time he was inaugurated, and he said, I am going to invite you and Governor Scranton to co-chair a committee for to call a convention for a new constitution for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now that took a lot of courage, and I'll tell you why. Governor Fine had tried to do that. Governor Leader, myself, had tried to do that. Governor Lawrence, the immediate predecessor, had tried to do that. And all of us had failed to get the legislative support for a new constitution. And here he was, just elected, and saying, I am going to make that number one on my agenda. Well, Bill Scranton accepted, I accepted, and sure enough, Ray Shafer was successful in having a constitutional convention that designed and crafted a constitution that brought Pennsylvania into the 20th century. That was a courageous thing to do because I have a saying, you can't risk success without risking failure. He was willing to risk failure, and he had the success that he deserved so richly. And that's the monument to him that'll be there long after the buildings probably fall down, because that's a good constitution and it'll probably stay there for a long time.
Were you surprised to get that call?
Yeah, shocked. Not that I didn't like Ray Shafer and not that we hadn't been on a friendly basis prior to that, but I was so surprised that anybody would make that number one on his agenda.
And how'd that unfold, and did it go smoothly?
Went along nicely. He kicked it off on a bipartisan basis. That's why he wanted Scranton and myself to co-chair it. In the past, nobody had laid the proper groundwork. None of us had laid a proper groundwork. He laid the groundwork even before he took the oath of office. And he continued on that bipartisan basis. And I know Bill Scranton and I co-chaired about 4 or 5 committees for various components of that Constitution because they broke it up into sections. And they all passed except one. And by that time, Bill wasn't around anymore. He had gone off to the United Nations or someplace. And we just didn't get... There was the one on the merit selection of judges. It was an important one, and we lost that one. But all the other things went through, and we still don't have merit selection of judges.
When you think of Governor Shafer, not, I guess, out of a political context, what do you think about?
Well, I think what he did over the years was be an outstanding student of Allegheny College, an outstanding board member at Allegheny College, and even I think he was acting president for a year when they were between presidents. I think of number one as a life that was dedicated to Allegheny College in many ways. I think an appreciation for what it had done for him. And secondly, I think of the fact that interest in education carried over to the public school system. And he had a lot of compassion. It carried over to the welfare of the people generally. He was very liberal on his public education support. He was very liberal on his higher education support. And he was very liberal on education across the board. And my father always said, there's only one way out of poverty, and that's education. And Ray Shafer had enough compassion in his heart and his soul to want to make the best possible education available to the young people and to the older people who might want to go back and take some schooling at the higher level. He really had them at heart.
Do you have any a good Ray Shafer story that you could share with us at all, or?
Well, we're here in Hershey this morning, and I remember Ray Shafer received some recognition about 10 or 15 years ago here in Hershey at the Country Club. I can't even remember the organization that honored him, but they called me up and said, would I make the presentation? And I said, of course, I like Ray Shafer. I'd be glad to make a presentation to him. So they had a luncheon out there, and all the people from all over the state who were interested in government and education attended. It was a lovely affair. And I made the presentation. Of course, as you know, Ray was a great golfer. And I used that old story about the fellows that the foursome was out playing golf, and the one man keeled over and died of a heart attack. And they carried him in. The other three carried him in. And when they got in there, someone said, well, you fellows deserve a lot of credit for carrying this heavy man all the way in here after he died on the golf course. And the other three, one of the other three said yes, and putting him down and picking him up between strokes wasn't easy either. I used that story, and Ray had a hearty laugh. We all had a hearty laugh, all because Ray was such a golfer, interested so much in that. And he was a healthy-looking man. He was a big, strong man. And he had a lot of courage, and he did a lot of courageous things in addition to the Constitution. But I think that's the monument he built that will stay for a long, long time.
What are a couple of the other courageous things as you...
Well, he was one of the early people to be interested in China. I think along about the time that the Nixon administration was getting their lines open into China, Ray Shafer was heading up a group. He was chairman of a group of people to encourage financial or economic relations, business relationships with China. I don't know what his practice was like, but I would suspect that he had a lot of clients who had interest in China, and if he represented them well, I'm sure. I know when we were in Hong Kong on our trip to China some years ago, his son-in-law was helping to run the electric utility in Hong Kong. And we stopped in to see him at the suggestion of a mutual friend. And son-in-law called Ray up on the telephone, and we all talked on the phone and visited and shared the pleasure of being with his son-in-law, who was running the electric utility in Hong Kong.
When's the last time you talked to Governor Shafer?
It's been a long time. Our paths just didn't cross. The last time I talked to him was on the telephone about 2 months ago, I'd say. And when he called me back, it was about 2 weeks before he returned my call. He said, I want to apologize. But he said, I don't go to the office every day anymore. He said, I just go in occasionally, pick up my mail, and see and return my phone calls. And he said, I'm sorry I was so slow getting back to you. And we had a nice chat. And he said he didn't complain about the fact that he wasn't feeling too well. But it was quite obvious to me that a man of his motivation and his energy and his background, if he had felt at all decent, he would have been going to the office every day, or maybe off to China once in a while as well, and doing all the things that he had done so well over the years. But he was a motivated man, and he was a good citizen, and he was a good governor, and he cared about people, and he was a moderate like myself. And what America needs and what Pennsylvania needs in both political parties are moderates. The conservatives tend to be too selfish. The liberals sometimes tend to be too liberal and have trouble financing what they want to do. But if both parties will have the moderates working together, going down the road together, we can build a better Commonwealth and we'll have a better nation.
Governor George Leader, thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us.
Thanks, Bill. It's always good to be with you.
Governor Scranton, I just want to ask you first how you remember, how you think of former Governor Shafer.
Well, I first met Ray at law school. We were in law school together at Yale, and he was slightly older, so he was a class ahead of me. But I got to know him, and found him a very congenial and also very intelligent man. And then when we ran together as for governor and lieutenant governor, of course I got to know him very well. And thereafter, when we were working so hard to get a new Pennsylvania, he always was extremely loyal and hardworking, and did his job very well. And I really am totally indebted to him for being such a helpful person to me when I was governor, and for carrying on many of the policies that we introduced. Frankly, at that time, Pennsylvania was in bad straits, and it had very high unemployment and had had for more than a dozen years. And when we went in, the unemployment rate was 8.7, and we were determined to do everything we could. And we wrote it all in the platform. I've got it right there, of what we were going to do. And that's rather rare in this business. We did the platform on 4 days in Pittsburgh, opening it up to anybody that wanted to tell us what they thought Pennsylvania needed. We came up with it, and the day after, literally the day after we were elected, before we went into office, we started work, and we got all the legislation prepared and got the sponsorship in the House and the Senate ready. And he was very helpful there because he had been a senator, state senator, and he was very helpful with the legislature. And we met when we went into office, we met every Monday morning at breakfast, which I paid for, of the leadership of the House and the Senate. And he was there every time, and we outlined what we wanted the legislature to do that week, and we got every bit of this platform done in the first 2 years we were there, with 2 exceptions. One was the Constitutional Convention, and we have a big debt to Ray Shafer because we got that done. He got that done, as you know. I was a member of it and ran the judiciary end of it, and that was the only major thing. And also we were very hopeful that he would carry on all of the programs and all the help we got from outside and inside around the state in bringing down that unemployment rate. And he did, and by the time I left, we'd reached some places, sometimes when the rate was only 3%. When he carried on, it got down to 2%, which is the lowest it's ever been. And it has never gone back up to where it was those dozen or so years before we went into office. So you see, I'm very high on Ray Shafer, and I'm sorry he's gone, because this was a guy who cared very much about Pennsylvania.
When he assumed, or when he took the governor's office, did you know that those policies would be carried on?
I was never worried about that, because he had been part and parcel of what we were doing and believed in it. And as he told me afterward, after his governorship was over, he said everybody gives him credit for getting the unemployment rate down, and I hope they do. And he said, but it was because of the policies that we put in together.
And what about the Constitutional Convention? How important, like looking back on it now, how important was that?
Well, that's a good question, because constitutions are rather complicated, as you know. As Jim Michener has written up in his books, New York tried to do it, Maryland tried to do it, Ohio tried to do it, and none of them could do it. We were very fortunate, and I think did a smart thing. Instead of trying to do over the whole Constitution, we took 4 major parts of it and asked the people to let us try on those. And I think that's why we were successful in getting it done. Now, how important is it today? Well, it did do, it set up the whole judiciary system, as you know, and I'm very familiar with that, and I think it was a great step forward. It also allowed governors to succeed themselves once. I had to get out, which was maybe a good thing for the nation, I don't know, and fortunately Ray carried on the unemployment problems very much, so that was all right. But now they can be there for 2 terms, which I think is a good change. It also had a lot of smaller things in each of those 4 major ones, which made it a much more modern and much more useful Constitution than it had previously been, and allowed for Pennsylvania to get ahead and be progressive when previously it had been badly, I think, stopped by some of the things that were in that old Constitution.
We're here with former Pennsylvania Governor Dick Thornburgh to share some thoughts about the recent passing of former Governor Raymond Shafer. What were your impressions of Governor Shafer?
Well, I first met Ray Shafer about 40 years ago when he was a candidate for governor and I was a young lawyer running unsuccessfully for the United States Congress. He was a big man and with a big heart.
Physically a big man or a big presence?
Physically a big man, and he had a hearty laugh and a good sense of humor, and one you could take to very easily. So I was very taken with him and kept in touch with him over the years up until his untimely death.
Now, as governor, what would you notice some of his major accomplishments?
I don't think there's any question that the biggest contribution that Ray Shafer made as governor was reform of our Constitution. The Constitution had been adopted in 1874, and his getting behind the effort to call a constitutional convention in 1967-68 was a major step forward. I served as an elected delegate to that convention.
What was that like? That was the last one we had.
It was fascinating. It was historic, and it was a fascinating effort by some 160 or so Pennsylvanians to take a look at our basic charter. And didn't get all the job done, but it made substantial improvements in our judicial system, in our system of local government, and our procedures for taxation and budgeting. And I think in many ways that's a great monument to Ray Shafer as governor. Unfortunately, he used up a lot of political capital getting that job done, and it left him vulnerable on other issues that he had to deal with the balance of his term in office.
Now, what would some of those other issues have been, for example?
Well, he had to raise taxes, and that's never popular with Pennsylvanians, and had to face sizable budget deficits. And I think probably the time that he put into, and he put substantial time into promoting the Constitutional Convention and its results, couldn't help but subtract from his ability to use his political capital in other areas as well.
Now, pundits often refer to Governor Shafer as a progressive. Would you agree with that, and if so, why?
He would have welcomed the label of progressive Republican, and he was that. He was in the tradition of Theodore Roosevelt and Governor Gifford Pinchot and his immediate successor, Bill Scranton, all of whom were forward-looking, sensitive Republican leaders, and Ray's interests in education was a hallmark of his commitment to the next generation. And it showed after he left public life, the 2 occasions that I had to work with him, I think, were significant in that respect. He was a leader in promoting better relationships with the People's Republic of China, and an area very close to Jenny's and my heart. He was on the board of the National Organization on Disability, tending to the rights and opportunities of people with disabilities. So he was truly a progressive leader and thinker.
Now, if you had to leave our viewers with a one-word description of Governor Shafer, what would it be?
I think he was a sound and sensitive governor. He knew what needed to be done. He was the only Pennsylvania governor who had served previously as a lieutenant governor, so he'd kind of gotten his pre-game practice in, serving 4 years as lieutenant governor to Bill Scranton, one of our greatest governors. And he was sensitive to the people's needs. Sometimes he stubbed his toe and trying to get his programs enacted, but it wasn't for lack of trying, and it wasn't for lack of perception. I think people have very warm memories of Ray Shafer as governor. I certainly do.
Now, you said after he left office you had occasion to run into him occasionally. Did he offer you any advice when you decided to run for governor?
He supported my candidacy for governor. I was proud to say both he and Governor Scranton were active in supporting my campaign, and that of course made me proud because they were the leaders that I'd come to admire during the early years of my political life. So that was a source of great pride to me.
Governor Thornburg, thank you so much for sharing thoughts and stories with us about the late Governor Raymond Shafer.
Indeed. Thank you.
Need a gift idea? How about a PCN tour or a Gettysburg Battle Walk for the holidays? If the person on your list likes manufacturing or following in the footsteps of Civil War soldiers, go online and visit the PCN store for a list of tours.
Governor Shafer, how did you get involved in politics?
Well, it's a long story. I had been in World War II as a PT boat skipper in the South Pacific, and while I had started practicing law in New York City out of law school with Secretary of War Stimson, at the end of the war, my wife and I decided to go back home to Meadville, Pennsylvania, and I put out my shingle and started practicing there, and before I knew it, there was an opening for district attorney in the sense that there was an election. And a lot of my friends then said, you've always been interested in government, you've always been interested in political science, why don't you try it? I said, well, I don't have any organization or anything like that. I said, well, you've got a lot of friends, so that's what happened. I announced for district attorney and ran against the incumbent in the primary, and the rest is history.
What was that first campaign like?
In what way?
Was it different than you had expected it to be?
Oh, yes. Well, this was out in western Pennsylvania, Crawford County, and the campaign consisted of my going around and visiting as many people as I could possibly visit because I wasn't well known at that time, even though my family had come from Crawford County. In fact, my great-great-great-grandfather was one of the first settlers in Crawford County. I, as an individual, wasn't known politically, and so I had to get out and get known. And so I attended a lot of Grange meetings, church socials, school board meetings, all kinds of meetings like that. And so it was a very personal campaign where I and my wife and, of course, my kids went along with me from time to time. And it was a very fascinating experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I had a landslide victory. I won by 196 votes, which surprised a lot of people because we were running against the incumbent, who was backed by the state Republican chairman at that time. But from then on, in fact, I got the nomination on both tickets when I first ran, and I got it again when I ran for re-election 4 years later.
And after that, how did you decide to stay in politics?
Well, of course, I was district attorney for 8 years, and so the DA in a county the size of Crawford is very active in political affairs, and I kept my interest there.
And I had always been interested in political science and in government, and it just flowed naturally with my life. I'm a lawyer by profession, and so I kept up my interest in what was going on not only in western Pennsylvania, but throughout the Commonwealth and in the country. And after I was district attorney for those 2 terms, several of my friends suggested that I should seek other offices, and they came to me and asked me to run for the state Senate. And 2 years after I was DA, I was elected to the state Senate. And from then I became lieutenant governor and governor.
How did, when you ran for governor, what was that campaign like?
Well, it was a very difficult campaign. I came from northwest Pennsylvania, and no one from my section of the state had ever been elected governor. I guess one ran some time ago, but usually the governors came from either the Pittsburgh or the Philadelphia area or central Pennsylvania, and no one had come from what we called the forgotten area of our great Commonwealth. And so I, again, was not well known throughout the state, and I had to do a lot of the same things that I did at the very local level when I ran for DA. I traveled all over the Commonwealth and met a lot of friends, but I had the advantage of having been lieutenant governor, and during my 4 years as lieutenant governor, I got to know every section of the state, and that helped me very much in the general campaign.
When you became governor, were there goals that you went into the office with, specific things you wanted to do?
Yes, we had several distinct goals, and we announced them very carefully in our campaign. The one thing that we wanted to do was to have a new state constitution for Pennsylvania. 6 other governors had tried to change the Constitution of 1874 and had failed. And a lot of my political friends said, "Ray, you're making a mistake. It won't go. Nobody is really interested in changing it." I said, well, the fundamental document of our law in our great Commonwealth should be a good one that meets the challenges of the times. And I said, we're going to make it one of our first legislative priorities, and we did. Then I also had great goals for education and above all, for our economy.
What was it like trying to change the Constitution of the state? How did you get support to do that?
Well, I got a lot of support from individuals who recognized that it was necessary to have a modern Constitution. And we formed a constitutional committee. I had George Leader and Bill Scranton working on that, and they cooperated exceedingly well. And we had a strong committee, and then we had to get the legislature to adopt the legislation to get it started. And we decided to do something different. Instead of just asking for a constitutional convention that would change the whole Constitution at once, we divided the areas into 4 sections. One involving finance, one involving the judiciary, one involving local government, and then one that would handle all of the other aspects of the law. And by doing it in that fashion, we called the Constitutional Convention, and they passed then 4 separate articles. And then the 4 articles were submitted to the people. Now, the people who did not want to change the judiciary as it was now, as it was constituted then, couldn't very well talk against the others, but they could talk against the judiciary. But it so happened that by dividing the opposition to a new constitution, we were able to get every one of them passed. We had we didn't get everything we wanted in the convention, But we gave Pennsylvania the finest state constitution in the country. In fact, many of the other governors looked at our work and copied it for their own purposes. New York, New Jersey, Wisconsin, Washington, all were very interested in what we had done.
What would you say some of the significant changes to the Constitution were, if you could pick out a few?
Well, in the judiciary, we finally produced a unified judicial system for the Commonwealth. Prior to that time, the appellate courts were separate organization. The local courts were all under their own jurisdiction in the various counties. There was no supervision from the Supreme Court. So we unified the judicial system, and then in addition to that, we arranged for judges, after they had been first elected, to run on a stay or get out basis. In other words, they didn't have to run for the office again. They just ran, as they do now, because the law is still in effect, on a yes-no basis. That isn't exactly what some of us wanted. I myself wanted really to have a judicial system closer to the federal judiciary, where the various judges would not have to run on a political basis, but would be appointed by the governor after a recommendation from a special committee, and then have to be, then they'd have to go through the Senate and get accepted by the Senate. That didn't go through, but that's still a possibility yet, and I think that that will help our judicial system at the present time.
Were there any other things that you wanted changed?
Well, sure. One other thing, one very important aspect was, under the 1874 Constitution, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania could only borrow $1 million. Can you imagine that? Only $1 million. And this was absurd, so therefore they had to set up all these development groups and organizations that could raise money, then get help from the Commonwealth on the side, which was really a fraudulent way to run the government. We felt that the Commonwealth should be able to borrow the funds in accordance with its fiscal responsibility, and so we changed that, and that's through. Another thing we didn't have was enough local autonomy at the local level, and so that third provision of the Constitution gave our counties and our municipalities greater authority and greater choices, greater flexibility, and they have that now. That's one of the reasons why our Constitution is so highly respected all over the country.
And while you were in office, were there other things besides the Constitutional Convention that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, I'm proud of a lot of things. I'm proud of the new Constitution, of course. I suppose one of the other things that I was very proud was the fact that during the 4 years of our administration, we had the highest employment, the lowest unemployment, and the highest per capita income that Pennsylvania had ever had, either before or since. And for example, during my 4 years, our unemployment ratio averaged 3%. And the very significant thing about that, that of course was the lowest in history before or since, and I'm very proud of that. And it wasn't my fault or my doing. It was the fact that I had gotten together a great team all over the Commonwealth who decided that we were going to have a strong economy. We knew that the steel industry was faltering. We knew that the coal industry was on its last legs. We knew that the railroad industry was really falling apart, and so we had to do other things. And so we organized teams in various sections of Pennsylvania, and they went out and brought in new business. So in those 4 years, we not only had the record that I just mentioned, but we also brought in more new business in those 4 years than at any time. Unfortunately, a lot of the programs that we started were put aside after I couldn't run for re-election, as you know, and my successor decided to abandon the programs that we had started, and as a result of that, unemployment started to rise and created a lot of problems in the ensuing years.
If you could have, would you have run for re-election?
Oh, yes. Yes, I feel very deeply that individuals should participate in the political process. And I, having made my desire to participate as an individual running for office, I certainly would have run for re-election, and hopefully I would have won.
You had mentioned putting together teams. How does a governor select a cabinet and pick the people around him?
Well, you get recommendations from individuals from all over. For the person that I wanted for Attorney General, I got lawyers together to give me suggestions as to who would do the best job. For the Secretary of the Commonwealth, the same thing. For Secretary of Commerce, for Secretary of Education, things like that. Which leads me to another thing, namely, you asked me what I was very proud of, and I was also very proud of the fact that we had new things happening in Pennsylvania. We developed the Department of Education so that it would encompass not just primary and secondary school, but all educational groups. We wanted to have better higher education. During my administration, not only was the Pennsylvania State University the only state related at that time, but we brought in 3 more, the University of Pittsburgh, Temple University, and Lincoln University, so that they are state related. And we started the first higher education assistance agency, so that young people who wanted to get an education could come and get money at a low rate and pursue their education. And for that reason, we saw the expansion of individuals who went into advanced educational studies. We advanced all of the state colleges. They were all state colleges at that time, with the exception of Indiana, which was Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Now, all of them are state universities. And I think that the things that we did in building facilities for them, in bringing in top faculty, in getting students involved in government itself, helped make that college system one of the best, if not the best, in the country.
During your term as governor, you also had the Vietnam War going on at a national level. What kinds of things did you have to deal with here in Pennsylvania?
Yes, from 1967 to 1971 was one of the most difficult times in the United States because of the bad feeling in the country about the war itself. I was concerned because I had seen what had been happening in other states, and so I made it a point to visit our college campuses. I visited over 80 of our campuses during that period in order to talk to students, to talk to them about what was happening. My idea was that what we had in the United States, in Pennsylvania, where we elected our own leaders, was good, but it had a lot of defects. But rather than discard the system, I wanted to get our young people interested in participating and make the system better. And that's what I did. Went all over the Commonwealth and met with young people everywhere. And I must say, I'm very proud of the people of Pennsylvania because we did not lose one life. We had demonstrations, but we didn't have any real injuries. We decided that we would talk to the young people, be fair but firm. For example, at Penn State, there was a rally that got a little bit unruly, And so I asked the state police to come in, and they came in, and things quieted down, and no one was hurt. And the students suddenly realized that it was their school too, and they shouldn't make it a school that would have a bad reputation. In fact, in that instance, the leader of the rally, who had been quite upset about what was happening there, 2 months later came down to the governor's office in Harrisburg, and he says, "Governor, I want you to know that I was wrong in trying to excite students to more active action, and I want to commend you for bringing in the state police because that prevented people from getting hurt." And I said, "Well, I appreciate that very much," and he now has risen to a very high position of responsibility in Pennsylvania. That made me feel very good. So we did work on the Vietnam situation, and it was a difficult time because we were sending people overseas, and a lot of people thought that that was wrong. I always felt, very frankly, that we should never have gotten involved as heavily as we did. But once we got involved, we should have pursued it with much more vigor. In other words, it just seemed to me that this was a useless expenditure of lives on something that we weren't really determined to follow through and win on. And so I still feel that way. I feel that the young citizens that went over there did a magnificent job, and we owe them a great deal for what they did on behalf of their country. And I think that the Vietnam veterans should hold their heads high because they went over there and fought for their country as they were asked to do. And I don't have any real use for individuals who tried to avoid it in an illegal way.
During that time, did the president ask you for advice at all, or since you were a governor of one of the biggest states, did he ask your input on anything?
Yes, after we were engulfed there, after President Kennedy got us really involved, and then President Johnson took over after the terrible tragedy of Kennedy's assassination, I visited Washington many times, and I can remember the president talking to me saying, "I need your support." Well, I felt very strongly then, and I feel very strongly now, that when my fellow American citizens are fighting a war anywhere, we back them. And I told him that I would back that. I also told the president that I felt that we should not have gone in the way we did. General Eisenhower and General MacArthur had both said, don't get involved in a land war in China or Asia, any place at that time. But we did, and once we did, then I felt that we should back our troops, and I did that. And I'm proud that I did.
How did your own military experience come with you to the governor's office? Was there things you drew upon?
Oh, I think that once you've served in any capacity in the military, you have learned many lessons. You learn discipline, you learn judgment, you learn the ability to make decisions at a time when you're under stress. Yes, my military career had a great effect on the rest of my life, and it's something I don't want to go through again, of course, but it's something that I'm very happy that I had the privilege of serving my country.
During your term as governor, how did it impact upon your family and your personal life?
Well, obviously, a person who is the chief executive of the great commonwealth of 12 million people, you're busy 24 hours a day. You don't have time for any extraneous things except when you have an opportunity to be at home with your family or to take a short vacation now and then. And therefore, it was stressful, but we're a very close family. And so I believe that, we were able to overcome any of the problems of my having to travel from time to time away from the home. I had a wonderful wife and wonderful kids, and that helped. That made it possible.
How has politics changed since you first ran?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that. I just was in Harrisburg last week and talking to several of the individuals who had been in the legislature at that time, and also several of my cabinet members were there. And to a person, they said, you know, politics isn't fun anymore. I can remember back in those days, we had great differences between Republicans and Democrats. We had differences within the Republican Party. We had differences within the Democrat Party. But we didn't get mean. We didn't get obstreperous. We had our arguments, and we worked our fields as we felt we had to. But afterwards, there was still an ability to be courteous and civil to each other. I find that a lot of that civility is gone, and I think that's a sad day for our government. But I hope that we can change that, because instead of having young people constantly say, oh, government is bad, government isn't bad. It's some of the individuals who get in and try to make government work in a way that is wrong for the people. We ought to get more and more individuals active in political affairs. You know, we searched for centuries in order to be able to choose our own leaders, instead of being subject to the whims of some king or emperor or autocrat. And now we have that opportunity, and instead of denouncing our system, what we ought to do is make it work better. And I feel that very deeply.
What kind of advice would you give to someone that wanted to get into politics?
Well, you know, that's a very interesting way to put it, because in a free society, everyone is in politics, whether he or she wants to be or not. We each have the opportunity to choose our own leaders, and if we don't exercise that opportunity, then we're the losers. And of course, the whole government is the loser, because we should have more and more participation. Have people get better acquainted with what is going on. What are the issues that affect our public lives? Let's have differences, but let's talk about those differences and try to get them resolved as quickly as we possibly can. Anyone who wants to run for public office has an opportunity by just finding out what office that he thinks or she thinks can be done with her or his abilities, whether it be for school board, whether it be for city council, whether it be for the legislature, whether it be for judge, district attorney, or anything. And if you're interested in running, then talk to your friends, talk to people who have had the experience, and learn from them. It's not a difficult thing. It isn't something that you have to take a course on how to get into politics. You're in it whether you want to be or not in a free society. And so just take a long, hard look and study, and it can be done.
Has the way the media's covered people in public life changed since you were involved?
I think that it certainly has. I feel that the media has a greater influence on our public life than they are willing to admit. Because under our the First Amendment to the Constitution, they have a great power. And I think when I was in public office, the media were a little more self-constrained, but not as much as they should have been. In my opinion, they should be, if they're in the media and they're reporting, they should be reporters. If they're going to be commentators, then let them say that they're commentators. But don't pretend to be a reporter and use that facility as a commentator without letting the people know. I think that there was more restraint in that time by members of the media, for example. It's common knowledge that President Kennedy did a lot of things that the media just wouldn't report on. Today, it would be reported. I'm not saying that either is the better way, although I think that anybody in public life does have a right to privacy, but I also feel that people in public life have the responsibility of reporting anything. For example, such as your health. I think that a person who runs for a high office ought to make sure that his health records or her health records are made known to the general public so they know what the situation is. When President Roosevelt was president, he had this terrible disease, and not one word was put in the print. I think that unfortunately was wrong. I think that that's when the media might have stepped in and done more to make the general public aware of his physical frailty. And there are example after example after example that we can give. One thing that most people fail to recognize is that the media has no organization to bring individuals before it when they violate the law, or when they violate good conduct, or when they violate ethics in reporting. For example, I'm a lawyer. If a member of my profession it does not live up to the ethics of the profession, that person can be brought before the Bar Association and disbarred. A doctor, if a doctor doesn't live up to the ethics of that profession, can go before the American Medical Association and be kicked out of practice. In the media, there's no one to do anything like that. And I don't think that government should do it. I think that the media themselves should set up their own organization so that if people violate ethics, if they violate good taste, that person can be brought before their own people, not the government, but their own organization. And I think that would eliminate a lot of the criticism that the general public has about people in the media today.
I noticed you're wearing a tie with elephants. Why are you a Republican?
Why am I a Republican? Because I believe in government that is efficient, that the least government is the best government for the people. That's a part of our founding fathers. They said that very clearly. I believe in fiscal responsibility. I believe in having balanced budgets. I believe in serving individual responsibilities. I think that individuals should be recognized and promoted on the basis of their own abilities and not on the basis of any class group, whether it be economic or racial or gender. That's what I believe in, and I think that makes it for a better America. It doesn't mean that we don't like government. I want government to be here. We need government for the purpose of crime control, for the purpose of building better transportation systems, for the purpose of taking care of the truly unfortunate. But I don't think that we should just have too large a government, either at the federal level or at the state level or at the local level. That's one of the things that we tried to do when I was governor. We cut down on the numbers of individuals who were serving, but we did, I think, a very responsible job of serving people more efficiently and carefully.
Previous to becoming governor, you were lieutenant governor.
Yes.
It doesn't seem that in Pennsylvania that's the trend. Any idea why that might be?
Well, I was the first lieutenant governor who was elected governor as lieutenant governor. Did you know that? And only one other lieutenant governor had been, but that was after he had been lieutenant governor for several years. I don't know why that has developed. I think a lot of times in the early years, the lieutenant governor and the governor didn't get along too well, for one thing, and for that reason, the lieutenant governor had problems when he wanted to become governor, and we had several who tried but were unsuccessful. I think that I had announced for Congress, and Bill Scranton called me when the state committee had decided that they were going to back him for governor, and he called and asked me if I would run for lieutenant governor. Of course, in those days, I had to run alone. I couldn't run we didn't run as a team. We didn't do that till I changed the Constitution, which permitted governors and lieutenant governors to be on the same team and mandated it, which I think is right. And I had announced for Congress, so I had to quickly change my direction, because I felt that if my friends felt that we could win this election as a team, that I owed it to my party and to my friends to make the effort, and we did it, and each of us won. We had a very strong campaign back in 1962. I think that it's a good thing for an individual to have the experience of being lieutenant governor. Even though the lieutenant governor doesn't have a great deal of responsibility under our Constitution, he does have an opportunity to learn all about the Commonwealth and how it operates, as I did. And Bill and I had always gotten along so very well. I had no difficulty then in running, and thankfully I won by a huge majority.
And that experience benefited you once you took office as governor?
Oh, there's no doubt of it, because I had an opportunity to become familiar with the various departments. I had the opportunity to meet people from all over the Commonwealth who were interested in many things, whether it be the environment or economic advancement, whether municipal operations. I had an opportunity to observe the General Assembly in action. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor in Pennsylvania is the President of the Senate, and he presides over that, and that was in and of itself not as substantive as the other things that I did. I worked very hard on education when I was Lieutenant Governor. Bill asked me to do that, and I did. And that gave me a great foundation when I did become governor.
After you served your term as governor, did you ever think about running for another office?
No, really, I did not. I had thought that at one time, if some opening appeared, like the Senate, but for that, when I left the governorship, there was my friends were in the Senate, and I wasn't going to run against them. So I didn't have any I made no effort whatsoever to run for any other office. I retired undefeated. I didn't lose an election in my career, and I'm very proud of that fact.
Was there anything as governor that you wish you had accomplished that you didn't get done?
Yes, I think that in the Constitution, I had hoped that we could have changed our General Assembly. I wanted to cut the size of the House down and cut the size of the Senate down. I thought it would become more efficient, and we were unable to get that done, but that's still something for the future. Another thing that I would do if I had a chance to, or if I had a chance to do it over again, would be get more involved in the operations of our citizens in economic areas, and have committees who would come and report on a regular basis. I think that would have helped. Even though we were most successful, and that's because we had this great team, or a series of teams from all over the Commonwealth who brought it about. I think that I would have benefited from that, and perhaps the Commonwealth would have too.
You mentioned cutting the size of the House and Senate. Why the two bodies?
Well, every General Assembly in the United States has two bodies, with the exception of Nebraska. Nebraska has a unicameral legislature, just one. So I don't know that there is any magic in having two, but if you study your history, you'll know the reason we had two. When our country was founded, they felt that it was necessary to have two bodies so that no one body would run over the people. And so they had the House, which would be more representative in numbers, but they had the Senate that was going to be able to sit back and take a look at what was happening and move a little more slowly without wanting to go into a rush in changing things. So I think that having the two bodies is certainly not the most efficient way to have legislation passed, but from the standpoint of protecting our rights, all kinds of rights, in the way of protecting the interests of all citizens, and each of us has a set of different interests, there's no doubt about that, that having the two bodies is good.
How do you think Pennsylvania's doing since you've left office?
Well, I think that it's been a sort of a roller coaster. We had some very bad down years, but then we've had some up years, and I'm very pleased that Pennsylvania is doing well today.
What are you doing now?
Well, you see me here in my office here in Washington, and you can come and visit me in my office up in Meadville if you wish. I'm practicing law, but I'm also involved in a lot of pro bono work. I have been chairman of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. In fact, I was chairman for 10 years, and I recently decided that I'd been there long enough, longer than any other chairman had been, and I asked Barbara Conable, who was the former head of the World Bank, if he would be interested, and he was, and so he is now the chairman, and I'm chairman emeritus. I'm also involved in the National Legal Center for the Public Interest, working to build a better legal system throughout the country, and I'm very proud of that. That's a nonpartisan group. In fact, just last week we honored the Chief Justice of the United States, and my old friend Whizzer White, who started to Yale Law School with me, was also a justice on the court, came and made the introduction of Chief Rehnquist. I think that organization is doing a great job of making sure that we move steadily forward in making sure that there is justice in the country, and I'm very happy with that. I'm also vice chairman of the Atlantic Council of the United States, which is a body built on building foreign policies, working on foreign policies, helping with foreign policies that affect the interest of the United States. And I'm very proud of being a part of that organization. I do other pro bono work. I'm on the board of the National Organization on Disability because I believe that we want to bring those individuals who are handicapped into everyday life so that they can feel that they're a part of. And I think we've made a great contribution there. When I say we, I meant we, the people of the United States, are doing more and more to help those unfortunates. So that I keep busy on all kinds of things, and I try to keep a very close interest on what is happening not only in the United States but in the world. I just came from a meeting before a meeting with you where we were discussing both the situation in Iraq, which is a real problem for all Americans, and the situation in Bosnia, which could break out again. So that I think it's important that all citizens try to keep as well informed as they possibly can on these things so that they can make judgments and help individuals who are in the positions of responsibility.
What kinds of, you'd mentioned China. And,
yes.
What kinds of things did you deal with in that position?
The National Committee on U.S.-China Relations was formed 30 years ago for the purpose of building a better understanding of the Chinese people by U.S. citizens, and a better understanding of U.S. citizens by the Chinese people, because there's been one of the greatest problems that arises in international relations is lack of understanding and lack of knowledge between the peoples themselves. So this committee was formed, and what we do is try to build better relations between our two peoples, and we talk about many things, the environment, education, health, military service, security, crime, so that what we were doing was trying to build real friendships with many in the People's Republic of China as well as Taiwan, because they're all Chinese, and we recognize that. And I think we've done a tremendous job. One of the things that I did when I was chairman was to start something called the U.S.-China Dialogue, in which we had top Americans and top Chinese get together in an off-the-record session to discuss those things that affected our two nations. Here we have the largest nation in the world and the most highly developed nation in the world, and the things that happen to these two nations not only affect them themselves, but affect every other nation in the world. And this dialogue, I think, has been very fruitful, especially when there are problems between our two countries. For example, Tiananmen Square created quite a problem. Created quite a problem for the Chinese government as well as the American government, and our committee tried to serve as a buffer to get people talking together again, and I think we're doing that now. I think that our relations with China have improved over the last couple of months, but prior to that, for the few years, it's been not as good as it should have been.
How did you come from Pennsylvania to Washington?
Well, Nelson Rockefeller and I were governors together, and we became good friends. And while I was head of teleprompter, as you know, Nixon resigned, and Ford became president, and that left an opening for vice president. And then Jerry Ford, who also was in my class in law school, by the way, asked Nelson if he would be his vice president. Well, Nelson then was nominated, and it took quite a while for him to be to get through the Senate. But he called me when this happened, and he said, you know, if I ever get confirmed, I'd like you to come to Washington and be my counselor. And I said, well, that's interesting. I'm doing what I'm doing now, practicing, and all. They've also talked to me about the possibility of maybe even being an ambassador. He says, well, what do you want to be? And I said, well, what do you want? He said, well, I'd like you to come to Washington. And I said, very well. If you get confirmed, I'll come. And that's how I came to and became the counselor to the vice president. And we had 2 great years traveling all over the country, and we worked, I think, Nelson had a lot of detractors in his life, as everyone in public life gets. That's why it's so difficult sometimes to get people to run for office, because of the barrage that they are sure to face by some elements. You can't please everybody by any means, but he was a very strong patriot. He loved this country, and he worked very hard, especially in making sure that our defenses were strong and making sure that our aerospace activities were strong. And I'm very glad that I accepted that, and I came down, and we had two, I think, fascinating and productive years.
You have a law office in Meadville, Pennsylvania still. Any plans to return there?
Well, you know, I'm gradually doing less and less as far as the law is concerned because of my age. I want to spend a little more time with my family, and I'm taking it easier all the time. And I still go back there. I'm up there part of the time now. And sure, I have a great office. My nephew runs that firm, and we're very proud of it. It's one of the, if I say so myself, one of the finest organizations in that area.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to see you and to be with you, and also it's really wonderful to be able to talk about the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which occupies a great big portion of my heart.
The State Farm Show has something for everybody. Which event are you better suited for? Trying to hold on for just a few pulse-pounding seconds to a frenzied, ground-shaking 8...
Raymond Shafer is, as I learn more and more about him, and you have to wring history out of him because it's hard to get him to say much about himself, but as I learn more and more, I'm so impressed by this man and what he's done. I think many of us are hopeful of doing one thing well in our lifetimes, and if we achieve that, we feel like we've succeeded. Raymond Shafer seems to be the sort of person who does absolutely everything well. Whether it's from becoming an Eagle Scout and excelling as a youth, to his academic prowess at Allegheny College, represented by Phi Beta Kappa, or his athletic excellence here, an athletic legend, if you will, on to law school and a distinguished life of service to humankind, a political figure, but much more than a political figure. A war hero, a decorated veteran of World War II, distinguished service both in appointed and elected official public posts, a friend and confidant to anyone from presidents to professional athletes and everything in between. His record is truly distinguished, and Allegheny is so very proud, Governor, to have you be our favorite son, both Allegheny College, Meadville, Northwestern Pennsylvania, and indeed the entire Commonwealth. So it's my privilege to preside at this occasion and to be president of your alma mater while you're a lifetime member of the Board of Trustees, and I think arguably Allegheny's biggest booster and most prominent booster, because I'm fond of remembering the governor always says, well, I'm from Meadville, and if somebody doesn't know where Meadville is, I say, well, of course, that's the home of Allegheny College. That's the distinguishing marker that he uses for placing Meadville on the map. We're grateful tonight for those who have put this program together. The History and Heritage Committee of Allegheny receives a great deal of recognition and credit for doing this. Dick Stewart, who has worked hard on this program, John Kolech for chairing that committee, and of course Brenda Armstrong, who, as usual, behind the scenes is making everything happen while others are out front. So Brenda, thank you for your good efforts on this wonderful evening. We have, as you will see as the program unfolds, brought together some people who were important to the Shafer era, who have special insight into the importance of the era, And we're pleased that our guests, our distinguished guests, could be here with us tonight. I'm also doubly pleased to say that they have Allegheny connections in many sorts of ways, and it's good to have them, in many cases, back home with us. To do the good business of the order tonight is a very qualified moderator. He is our Professor Emeritus of Political Science, Professor Wayne Merrick. Professor Merrick has a distinguished history and connection with Allegheny College, serving 30 years on our faculty, some 29 of those years as chairman of the Political Science Department, as chair of the International Studies, in fact, the originator of International Studies as we know it. Dr. Merrick was a decorated, distinguished World War II officer in what Tom Brokaw has called the greatest generation. And I think as the night unfolds, you'll see why Brokaw has put that distinguished label on these folks. Dr. Merrick served with distinction in Patton's Third Army in Europe in 5 campaigns, including Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge. And he retired as a colonel in the Air Force in 1973. Dr. Merrick has been active in Republican politics. Indeed, he was the Republican nominee for Congress in 1970, and he has served as a member of the State Committee and twice on the State Platform Committee. He was active in the Scranton campaign and notably in the Shafer campaign as well. So with no further delay, let me turn the program over to our moderator, Professor Wayne Merrick. Dr. Merrick.
Thank you, Richard. I could sit here and listen to that, go on and on and on. And I wish I could believe it all. I want to also add my words of welcome, not only to the Shafer family spread out in front of us here, a couple of rows, but to the friends of Ray's from college and from the community. This is a very special program. Otherwise, all of us would not be here, I'm sure, together on this occasion. As a moderator, my job is to be seen and heard as little as necessary. So I'm going to move immediately to what we consider the ground rules. We have agreed, stimulated by Dick Stewart, who incidentally has spent a great deal of time and energy and shown a lot of imagination in putting this panel together. We will have short comments, no real speeches by the four members of the panel, and then we'll invite Governor Shafer up to make a few comments, hopefully not denying everything they say. Then and only then we will turn it over to you for some questions and comments, as you wish. But you'll have to come to this mic to do so because we're on TV. It's not a candid camera thing exactly, but you will be registered for posterity. After the program is over, we will adjourn next door to the oratory for a reception. I should mention that a little over a week ago, Governor Shafer was honored by the members of the Board of Trustees, and a portrait was unveiled on campus. Unfortunately, Sally and I were not here. We were in Vermont at the time, but I understand it was a gala occasion. There are Shafer memorabilia in the library, including the portrait. So those of you who particularly are in town and want to drop by tomorrow or the next day or whatever to see it. Without further ado, we'll go to the first panelist. It's hard to see how one can introduce Hugh Flaherty other than to say that he was a man probably who spent more time, intimate time, with the governor than anyone else during Ray's administration. He carried the cabinet title of Secretary for Legislation and Public Affairs. He was a researcher, a speechwriter, public relations, and one could say etc., which means he wore about 17 other hats. I'm sure that Lee Donaldson could maybe add a couple more hats to those that I wouldn't know about. He is a professional newspaper man, at one time a White House correspondent. An AP story, press story, described Hugh as, quote, the governor's chief confidant and advisor, who ranks as one of the most powerful men in state government, yet few have heard of him, end quote. Now, I doubt that most legislators at that time in Harrisburg, including Lee, would agree with that statement. I think they heard of and from him frequently. It's a pleasure to present Hugh Fardy.
And they still haven't heard of him. Governor Shafer, Mrs. Shafer, Diane, Phil, distinguished colleagues on the panel, and ladies and gentlemen. Cicero taught us that to be ignorant of what occurs before we were born is to always remain a child. For what is the worth of human life, he asked, unless it is woven into the life of our ancestors by the record of history? Tonight, we are here to help Allegheny students weave into their lives the history of one of this college's most illustrious graduates, Raymond P. Shafer, and his record as governor of Pennsylvania from 1967 through 1970. Less than 3 decades after his Allegheny graduation, Ray Shafer was providing intelligent, honest, and courageous leadership to more than 11 million Pennsylvanians. He brought to that job his experience as a student athlete of excellence here, as a decorated war hero, as a member of an outstanding law class at Yale, as a practicing lawyer, district attorney, state senator, and yes, lieutenant governor in the highly successful and popular administration of William Scranton. The Shafer administration began in the middle of a Dickensian decade. It was one of the worst of times and the best of times. For the best of times, the economy was robust. The excitement of space exploration and new scientific discovery captured our imaginations. The equality movement for women and minorities swelled irreversibly. For the worst of times, we had assassinations, Vietnam, anti-war and civil rights protests, urban and campus unrest and violence, an emerging drug culture, and the sowing of our current culture of complaint. In this period of national upheaval, when police and National Guards were needed to keep peace in many American cities and on campuses, Pennsylvania fared better than most states. Only once was it necessary to call out state police to campus unrest and National Guard to urban unrest. The governor worked with college presidents, state and local leaders to keep channels of communication open with the communities and colleges. He engaged more young people in the political process. He established neighborhood assistance programs and governor's branch offices in urban areas. He expanded fair housing and fair employment laws. It is to Governor Shafer's everlasting credit that his response was far-sighted, measured, and reasonable. Newspaper columnist Robert J. Samuelson recently wrote that one of the main sources of division in our country today is the, quote, insecurity of politicians who avoid making anything that risks unpopularity. Ray Shafer did not suffer from such insecurity, and because he did not, Pennsylvania is a better place today. I'll give you an example. The governor took office in 1967. Pennsylvania was lumbering under a constitution that had not been revised for more than a century. Its archaic provisions prevented modernization of the judiciary, local government, state finances, among other severe limitations. But revision of the document was not a sexy or popular issue, and previous failures to make it the highest priority had doomed it politically in this state. Against the advice of many political leaders, including those in his own party, Governor Shafer chose to make constitutional revision the first and highest priority of his administration. One political leader told him, "You're making your first big fight for good government on an issue that is full of political problems. It's against our advice, and if you lose, you're dead politically in this state. Don't do it. The governor understood that risk, and he chose to take it. And just 4 months after his inauguration, Pennsylvania agreed with him and went to the polls and approved convening a limited constitutional convention. Was the risk worth it? Other members of this panel and historians will provide a more objective view than mine, but I say it was. In a report in the 1968 Pennsylvania Manual, a state historian wrote, quote, that when the echoes of the debate wane and opinion formers dispassionately study the results of the Constitutional Convention, the recommendations will be hailed as the greatest opportunity for better government at the state and local level ever offered to the people of Pennsylvania. Governor Shafer's choice of constitutional reform was the first of many courageous acts that marked his 4 years in office. One of his first and most immediate challenges was balancing the state's economic and social needs with fiscal responsibility. Even before he began, the state budget was $300 million short of the amount needed to meet the cost of programs mandated by previously enacted laws. The governor saw this shortfall as a vicious cycle that continued to plague Pennsylvania politics, and he set out to find long-term solutions. He appointed a bipartisan tax commission to recommend how to maintain a reasonable balance between broad-based consumer taxes and levies on business and industry. He created the first of its kind Commonwealth Priorities Commission, made up of citizens to rate state services in their order of importance and recommend spending priorities. I was amused recently to read editorial praise for a current governor of a western state who formed a similar commission. It was hailed as a bold new idea whose time had come. Governor Shafer took the tax and priorities recommendations and crafted them into a budget that he believed would solve the state's fiscal problems. But he also knew how politically difficult it would be for a closely divided legislature to accept his proposal. I remember being in a meeting with him and other advisors where we were going over the budget and revenue recommendations, which included his tax commission's proposal for the state's first flat income tax. I'll paraphrase what he told us. What we are about to propose will be extremely unpopular with the people and the legislature. We will have few supporters, even among those who benefit from the services. So we had better prepare ourselves for a long uphill fight. We may not win in this administration, but it's our responsibility to set the course now if Pennsylvania is going to meet the future needs of its people. The governor was right. The budget fight lasted for the remainder of his administration and into the next administration, which had little choice but to adopt the fiscal package, not unlike the first proposed by the Shafer administration. Along with his undaunted courage, Governor Shafer kept his promises. He ran on a platform in 1966 called To Lead the Nation. This contained 179 specific pledges. 99% of those pledges were fulfilled by the end of his term. Consider that record in the context of today's politics, when platforms are often adopted only to be ignored. By keeping his promises, Governor Shafer's term was marked by substantial, often sweeping changes to meet Pennsylvania's educational, economic, and social needs. Education reforms that began in the Scranton administration with new inventions of the Shafer administration provided historically high support for local school districts and launched unprecedented growth for the state's public and private higher education system. 48 new vocational technical high schools were opened, along with 8 community colleges. The state's educational television network was launched. And if you take a tour of the state's higher education facilities today, you will find a significant part of their dramatic expansion occurred from a record $1 billion of capital improvements made or approved during the Shafer administration. Private institutions such as this great college benefited from the creation of the Pennsylvania Higher Education Authority, from record high state support for student scholarships and student loans. Pitt, Temple joined Penn State at state-related universities, and the transition to university status for state colleges began. Pennsylvania's environment is better today because the administration reorganized its approach to protecting the state's water, land, and air through a new Department of Environmental Resources. Tough new laws were enacted. A 10-year environmental protection plan was put in place, anchored by a voter-approved $500 million land and water conservation and reclamation fund, a giant step to clean up the scars of abandoned mining and improve our state parks and recreation areas. The governor emphasized the importance of transportation to the Commonwealth's economic future. He ordered a 2-year study to develop a state master plan for transportation. The study culminated in the creation of a new Department of Transportation to coordinate all transportation services in the state. He ordered acceleration of highway construction, especially the state's interstate highway system, to support economic growth. That construction led to more miles of new and improved highways than at any time in the state's history. And those of you here in northwestern Pennsylvania certainly know how you benefited from the completion of I-79 and I-80. One of the governor's proudest achievements was his support for expansion of business and industry and consequently new jobs in Pennsylvania. For the first time, state matching funds helped rural as well as urban areas develop industrial sites. A new Pennsylvania Science and Engineering Foundation helped subsidize industry-oriented research, and the first Governor's Economic Advisory Council in the country, made up of distinguished economists from private enterprise and academia, set guidelines for the future of industrial and commercial growth in the state. While no politician should be given total credit or discredit for the vicissitudes of economic change, the governor still loves to tell me this: unemployment rate consistently remained below the national average, personal income increased compared to other industrial states, and nearly 170,000 new and future jobs were created. I hear that all the time yet. It rings in my ear. There was no area of state government in which improvements and advancements were not made under the governor. He was driven by his vision of a Commonwealth of excellence, a vision he outlined in his inaugural address when he called for Pennsylvanians to help those who need it and provide opportunity for those who want it. That vision of excellence including his insistence on honesty and the highest level of integrity in conducting the state's business, and that set the tone for a scandal-free administration. Each cabinet officer was given an emblem of excellence to keep on his desk. I still have mine. It was to remind us daily that good was not the goal, excellence was the goal. Did we meet that goal? I, of course, believe we did, but I'll leave that answer to you and to history. Of one thing I am certain: there have been 43 men who have served as Pennsylvania governors since 1790. None has served with more integrity, honor, courage, fairness, and compassion than Ray Shafer. They are values he learned at home and reinforced at Allegheny. And I know he agrees that much of the credit for the molding of his character must be given to the learning and experience he received on this campus. There is an old aphorism that history is the rearview mirror on the road to life. May I suggest to each student that as you look into that mirror, you see Ray Shafer not only as a proud part of Allegheny's legacy, but as someone you can wisely choose as a role model for your trip down that road to the future. And so I ask, who among you will follow in his footsteps to a life of civic service and contribution that perpetuates the value of an Allegheny education and brings more Shafer-like honor to yourselves in this great institution? Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. You can see why this man played such a very important role in the administration of our honored guest tonight. You spoke of the inaugural address. I have a copy, and I reread his farewell address, which itself is very enlightening and brings together those things, not only that had taken place in 4 years, but a challenge which he threw down for his successor and for the citizenry. Our next panelist is I use this phrase very carefully, a two-timer, Alleghenian, a graduate of the college in 1946, and in 1967 it was my pleasure and my honor to present him for an honorary degree. A practicing attorney, graduate of Pitt, member of the General Assembly, had a snap job as Republican floor leader during the administration, delegate to that state constitutional convention, and a one-time judge of the Court of Common Pleas in Allegheny. It's my pleasure to introduce once again Lee Donaldson.
Thank you, Wayne. Governor, Ms. Shafer, members of your family, President Cook, my fellow panelists, fellow Alleghenians, and guests. I never worked for Ray Shafer, but he never had a more loyal, devoted, or honest guy than Hugh Flaherty, and what Hugh tells you, you can count on. Now, I never worked for him. I first met Ray Shafer when I was a senior at Allegheny in 1946, following the close of the collegiate basketball season. A group of us who played on the varsity team and who lived in a fraternity house at 454 North Main Street. There was then a fraternity as well as a fraternity house at 454 North Main Street. We formed a basketball team to play in a Crawford County tournament, and the parent team that we would have to beat was a team called Wirtz Drug. Wirtz Drug was a pharmacy. It had nothing to do with any Colombian drug cartel. And its star player, as we heard, was some guy named Ray Shafer, and we'd heard about he was some kind of a legend. Good Lord, he was 8 years out of school. He was an old man. He wasn't going to worry us, you know. But nonetheless, we heard he was a pretty aggressive guy, so I put our toughest guy, Bill Kirkpatrick, Kirk, take care of this guy. And say Kirk's uncle, R.L. Kirkpatrick, later served for many years as chairman of the Board of Trustees of Allegheny College. Early on in the game, Kirk said to me, "This guy is pulling my jersey." I said, "You know, Kirk, tell the referee, but, you know, in the third quarter, I see Shafer go down, and Kirk's called for tripping." And I said, "Why did you trip him?" "Well, he said he's pulling my jersey." I said, "Well, you know, tell the referee, but don't trip him anymore." In the fourth quarter, and a pretty tight ball game, I think, Shafer's taking the ball out of bounds, and Kirk is guarding him, trying to keep him from coming out of bounds. And then I don't know how this happened. I really don't. But the famous, vaunted, vintage Shafer jaw came into conflict with the Kirkpatrick lethal right fist. And Kirk's out of the ball game. I said, "Kirk, why did you hit him?" He said, "He keeps pulling my jersey, and you told me not to trip him." The next time Ray Shafer and I come into contact is he's elected to the state senate and comes to Harrisburg in 1958. By that time, I'm a veteran Republican assemblyman, now in my third term, and I think, well, you know, this young guy, pretty nice guy, is coming down from the country from my alma mater. I better, you know, straighten him out a little bit, tell him about the chicanery that goes on here, and it's kind of an evil city, and he better be careful. And I must have done a pretty good job, because 4 years later, he's lieutenant governor. 4 years after that, he's governor, and I'm still in the legislature. So I knew that I did something right in that regard. Hugh Flaherty referred to the Constitutional Convention. Now, by the time Ray Shafer became governor, every former governor in the post-war period had wanted a new Constitution. Every Wayne Merrick and every college and university throughout this state knew we needed a new Constitution. And every editorial writer needed it. But there was strong, strong political opposition. There were those who wanted the status quo. The judiciary was perfectly happy where they were. They didn't want any change. The members of the legislature didn't want any change because, Lord Almighty, it might change the districts from which they were elected. Shafer pushed ahead with it, and a lot of us thought he was wasting a lot of political capital. And I think this is really an important thing, is that Ray Shafer was among those elected Republican officials, and I think we certainly need more of them today, is my opinion, who believed that government was not something just to be avoided, but that government was something that might be utilized to help people have better lives. And Pennsylvania needed that Constitution. He ran the risk, he took the risk, and incidentally, a couple of Allegheny touches in there. When the bill went through the House, George Haudenschild was the chairman of the House State Government Committee. He and his staff did a great job in getting it ready, and George went to Allegheny, had two sisters graduate, and he has a niece on this panel, and he was helpful. And the people, approved it. The delegates were elected, and they came to Harrisburg. And among these 150 elected delegates were the president of Allegheny College, Dr. Pelletier, a gentleman named Walter Clark, class of 24, and Mildred Ann Diddy of my own class of 1946. And because we in the legislature really didn't trust these delegates to do much, we had written in ourselves as ex officio delegates, so I was also a delegate. But when they came, these citizen soldiers, under the Shafer leadership, they didn't caucus in a party manner. They were in our house, in the House of Representatives, and they weren't acting like us. They were bipartisan, they were nonpartisan, they had a Republican committee chairman and Democratic committee chairman, and they went on and on and on. And they came out and they did a marvelous job, and they rewrote these articles of taxation, the judiciary, local government, finance, and the people overwhelmingly approved it. And let me tell you, had to pull a lot of jerseys to get that one done. Had to pull a lot of jerseys to get that one done. A couple other little things that, they're not little things, they're very important things that I think made me particularly proud. University of Pittsburgh was dead broke. They couldn't pay the bills. And Shafer put together a package. We got infused the money for them, made them state-related. They went on, and as you know, Governor, in 3 years, they hired Johnny Majors and became the national champions in football. So that had to be a good move. In conservation, we were very, very much interested in, and sincerely interested in clean streams and strip mine restoration. And if we weren't, the Pittsburgh Press had an outdoor writer who every weekend went with a guy named Bill Gookert, who headed the Allegheny County Sportsmen's Association. They took me sometimes, and we'd put these test tubes in the water. And if that test tube came out red, so did the press headline the following Sunday. And to everybody's utmost surprise, Ray Shafer appoints Bill Gookert, this arch sportsman, as head of the enforcement agency for clean streams and strip mine enforcement, and the thing worked. Gookert he talked to these coal guys in their own language, and he said, you guys are either going to get this done or something's going to happen. And as a result, if you want to, you can come down in my county today and fish in the Allegheny River. So that worked. Then we had school teachers. School teachers were walking out of the job. They were striking. And we would issue these pronouncements saying, that's against the law. We are going to fire you. We're going to put you in jail. No, that was working. So Ray put together a commission. That commission recommended the enactment of a Public Employees Relations Act, which provided for collective bargaining for public employees. And if you think that didn't require a lot of jersey pulling to get Republican votes for that one, it certainly did. But the thing did work and became the model for legislation all over the nation. I opened up by telling you my first encounter with Ray Shafer many, many years ago. I'm going to close by talking about my last one, which was a week and a half ago on the football field. I came up for the Wittenberg game with my grandson, Jack. I know that wasn't a very pleasant result, but on the other hand, it's probably Wittenberg's going to have to face Mount Union in the first playoff game, and that might not be such a pleasant experience for them. But at any rate, on the way up, my grandson said to me, Paul, I said, you ever pass any famous laws? Well, I said, you see these signs say Raymond P. Shafer Highway? I said, I did that. I was responsible for that. So we got up to the game, and as it turned out, Ray was at the game, and at some point in the game, he was introduced to the crowd. Now, we were way down in the student section. I assume he stood up, but I couldn't see him because he was up near the press box. But a guy near us with a baseball hat on and some kind of a shirt, when they said, you know, the governor is here, he stood up and waved his hands, you know. And my grandson said, "Is that the governor?" That's not the governor. So I made a point of taking it over and introducing him to the governor, who, of course, was very gracious. And on the way back down I-79, or whatever it's called, Jack said, "You know, that was a pretty nice thing that you did to have a highway named for that governor. It was pretty nice." He said, "What did he do for you?" And I thought about that, and I think I have an answer that I'm going to give to everybody. He makes me proud to be an Alleghenian, proud of my alma mater, proud to have been a Republican office holder attempting to make some improvement in the lives of the people of this Commonwealth, proud to be a Pennsylvanian, but most of all, proud that he's my friend, I'm his friend, and Ray, you can pull my jersey anytime. And Bill Kirkpatrick told me he can pull his too. God bless you, Ray.
Thank you, Lee. I'm sure that in your role as floor leader, you were pulling a few jerseys down there, too.